She said, "I'm keeping the apartment, you move out. I like it here." After I confronted her about cheating, it was my apartment, my name alone on the lease. I said, "I'll start packing." Then I packed her stuff instead, changed the locks, and left it all in the hallway. When she came home from her business trip, I-29 Mail signed the lease on a massive, top-floor downtown loft exactly 24 days before my entire life turned upside down. My fiancé absolutely had to have this specific building. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a private rooftop terrace, and a rent that made my accountant wince. Because her credit score was completely wrecked from what she claimed was a clerical error by her old bank, my name went on the lease alone. I paid the heavy security deposit. I paid the first and last month's rent. She moved her boxes in under the strict agreement that we would split the monthly utilities while she rebuilt her savings. We had been engaged for 4 months, and this place was supposed to be our fresh start. Instead, it became the staging ground for her exit strategy. It started on a random Tuesday evening. She was in the shower, and I was in the kitchen trying to order Thai food. My phone was completely dead, so I grabbed her iPad from the kitchen island to use the browser. As soon as I opened it, a notification slid down from the top of the screen. It wasn't a standard text message. It was a calendar alert synced directly from her work email. It read, "Flight to Miami, 8 a.m., confirmation X7B9KQ, boutique resort oceanfront suite, booked by boss." This immediately set off alarm bells because she had spent the entire morning complaining to me about how cold it was going to be at her upcoming regional sales conference in Chicago. She had even asked to borrow my heavy winter jacket. I clicked the alert, and it opened her email app. Right there in the inbox was a massive thread between her and her boss. I started reading, and my reality just fractured. These emails weren't about sales quarters or client acquisitions. They were highly descriptive, incredibly graphic messages about exactly what they planned to do in that oceanfront suite. The thread went back 6 months. That meant this was going on long before we got engaged, and long before I signed the lease on this expensive apartment she pushed me into getting. I didn't yell or throw the iPad. I just sat at the kitchen island, staring at the screen, processing the absolute betrayal. When she walked out of the bedroom, drying her hair with a towel, she casually asked if I had ordered the pad thai yet. I kept my voice completely level and asked her if Chicago was near Miami now. She froze in her tracks, the towel dropping slightly, and asked what I was talking about. I turned the iPad around and tapped the screen to wake it, showing her the open email thread. Honestly, I expected tears. I expected panic, frantic apologies, or even a desperate, scrambled lie. What I got instead was a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated entitlement. Her posture shifted instantly. The fake innocence vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. She walked over to the island, picked up the iPad, and closed the cover with a snap. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that I went through her things, and that it was a massive violation of her privacy. I told her she was flying to Miami to sleep with her boss, the wedding was off, and we were completely done. She let out a short, dismissive scoff, rolled her eyes, and said fine. She told me she had outgrown this relationship anyway. But then she leaned against the counter, crossed her arms, and delivered the most insane ultimatum I have ever heard. She told me she was keeping the apartment and that I needed to move out. She said she liked it there, it was close to her gym, and frankly, I could afford to find somewhere else. She told me I had until she got back from her trip on Sunday to get all my things out. I just stared at her, completely staggered by the audacity. I reminded her that it was my apartment and my name was the only one on the lease. She smiled smoothly and tried to sound like a legal expert, claiming we were domestic partners, that she lived there and her stuff was there. Then came the threat. She told me that if I tried to force her out, she would call the police and tell them I was being volatile and that she felt physically unsafe. She said they would remove me, so I should just be an adult and leave my keys on the counter on Sunday. She turned and walked back into the bedroom to finish packing for her trip. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I realized she wasn't just cheating on me. She had strategically planned to use me to secure a luxury apartment, force me out with false police reports, and likely move her boss in. I looked down the hallway and called out to her, saying okay, I'll start packing. She called back, telling me not to scratch the hardwood when I moved my desk. She left for the airport the next morning at 5:30 a.m. She didn't say goodbye. She just rolled her suitcase out the front door, looking incredibly smug and victorious. The moment the lock clicked shut, I went straight to work. I wasn't packing my things. I was packing hers. I started in the bedroom and was meticulously careful. I didn't just throw her clothes into garbage bags. I packed them perfectly into her remaining moving boxes from a few weeks prior. I wanted absolutely no accusations of property damage. Every shoe, every bottle of expensive lotion, every single piece of jewelry went into a neatly labeled box. By noon, I was dragging the boxes out of the apartment. Our building has a wide, private alcove in the hallway right outside my front door that doesn't block the fire exit or inconvenience the neighbors. I stacked her boxes neatly against the wall. At 1 p.m., the locksmith arrived. I had called him the night before. I showed him my ID and the lease agreement with my name clearly printed as the sole tenant. He swapped the deadbolt and the handle lock in about 20 minutes. While he was working, my phone rang. It was my mother, sounding absolutely frantic. She told me fiancé had just sent her the most unhinged text message, claiming I was having a severe mental breakdown, acting aggressively, and that she was taking over the apartment for her own physical safety. Fiancé had told my mother to come pick me up this weekend. The dirty tricks had already started. She was laying the groundwork for her false domestic disturbance claim to secure the apartment. I calmed my mother down, explained the cheating and the Miami trip, and told her fiancé's stuff was already in the hallway. A few hours later, I received a call from the building's property manager. He sounded thoroughly confused. He told me he just got an email from fiancé with a heavily redacted document attached, claiming I was legally subletting the unit to her and that she needed her name added to the building's security registry immediately. She had also requested a new set of key fobs be mailed directly to her office. I calmly explained to the manager that she was not a tenant. She had been a guest for exactly 25 days at that point. She was not on the lease, and I had not authorized any sublet. I told him to completely disregard her emails. He agreed and just asked me to keep the drama out of the lobby. That evening, I sat down at my laptop. If she wanted to play dirty, I was going to ensure she faced the absolute maximum consequences of her actions. I pulled up the photos I had taken of her iPad screen the night before. I hadn't just looked at the cheating emails. I had dug into the receipts she had saved in her work folder. That oceanfront suite in Miami. It was billed to the corporate expense account under client entertainment and lodging. The flights were expensed. The expensive dinners were expensed. They were committing blatant corporate fraud to fund their affair. I compiled every single screenshot and organized them into a neat, undeniable PDF file. I found the direct email addresses for the head of HR at her company, the chief financial officer, and the CEO. Then, I did a quick public record search. Boss was married and lived in a very nice house in the suburbs. It took me 15 minutes to find his wife's social media page, and through that, her personal business email. I drafted the emails, attached the PDF, but I didn't send anything yet. I wanted fiancé to return first. I wanted her to be standing in the hallway when her entire world collapsed. Sunday evening rolled around. 7:45 p.m. This was exactly day 29 since she had moved her first box into the apartment. In my state, a guest does not establish legal tenancy rights until they have resided in the dwelling for 30 consecutive days. The math was perfectly on my side. I was sitting on my couch, watching the security camera feed I had installed facing my front door. The elevator dinged. Fiancé walked into the frame, dragging her suitcase. She was heavily tanned and still wearing that arrogant smirk. Then, she saw the massive stack of boxes. She stopped dead in her tracks. She dropped her suitcase handle, walked up to the boxes, read the labels in my handwriting, and then lunged for the door handle. It didn't turn. She began pounding on the door, screaming at me to open it right now. I didn't move an inch. She yelled through the heavy wood that she was calling the police and that I was going to be arrested for an illegal eviction. I just waited. 10 minutes later, 2 city police officers stepped off the elevator. I watched them approach her on the camera. She immediately burst into theatrical tears, sobbing to the officers that her abusive ex had locked her out, that she lived there, and that I was trying to illegally evict her without notice. I walked to the door, unlocked the new deadbolt, and pulled it open. The older officer stepped forward and told me I couldn't just lock my tenant out, warning me about illegal self-help evictions. I spoke very calmly. I told him she was not a tenant, but a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She shrieked that she lived there. I handed the officer a manila folder containing my lease with only my name on it, and the receipt for the security deposit paid directly from my personal bank account. The officer looked it over and asked for her ID. She handed it over, and he noted the address on her license was for an apartment on the other side of the city. She snapped that she just hadn't updated it yet. Then I handed the officer a printout of our text messages. I pointed to a text from her exactly 29 days ago saying, "First night in the new place." I explained the state law regarding the 30-day requirement for tenancy and pointed out that she had been there exactly 29 days, spending the last 4 of them in Miami. She had no lease, received no mail there, and had paid 0 rent. The officer looked at the text, looked at her ID, and then looked at her, asking if it was true she moved in less than 30 days ago. Her face flushed bright red. She stammered about being engaged and buying groceries. The officer's tone shifted from sympathetic to incredibly stern. He told her groceries don't establish residency. He handed my folder back, told me I was within my rights and that this was a civil matter. He then turned to her and stated she had not established tenancy, was legally a guest, and if she tried to force entry, she would be arrested for breaking and entering. She completely lost her mind, screaming at me that I couldn't do this and that it was her apartment. I just told her to take her boxes or building management would throw them in the dumpster. She refused to move and sat on one of the boxes, glaring at me. The officers sighed, called building security, and security came up to inform her that since she wasn't a resident, loitering in the hallway constituted trespassing. She had no choice. She had to call boss. 10 minutes later, boss walked off the elevator. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, wearing a baseball cap pulled down low to avoid the cameras. She just snapped at him to help her with the boxes. I stood in the doorway, watching them haul her entire life down the hall. Just as boss picked up the last box, I looked right at him and told him I hoped the oceanfront suite was worth it. He froze, his face draining of all color. He didn't say a single word. He just hurried into the elevator. As the doors closed, I walked straight over to my laptop. I opened the drafts folder in my email. I hit send on the email to HR. I hit send on the email to the CFO. I hit send on the email to his wife. The fallout was rapid and entirely of their own making. By Tuesday morning, fiancé and boss were called into an emergency meeting with HR and the company's legal department. You cannot expense a romantic getaway as a corporate conference. It is literal theft. Boss was terminated immediately for cause, meaning he lost his massive severance package and his invested stock options. Fiancé was fired later that same afternoon for complicity in expense fraud. Boss's wife, having received my highly detailed PDF complete with timelines and corporate receipts, filed for divorce by Thursday. Since they lived in an at-fault state and he had burned through marital assets to fund his affair, her lawyer absolutely gutted him in the proceedings. But fiancé still wasn't done trying to force her will on reality. 3 weeks later, I was served with papers. She was suing me in small claims court for $10,000, citing illegal self-help eviction, destruction of property, and emotional distress. She honestly believed she could talk her way past a judge just like she tried to manipulate the police. We went to court 45 days after I kicked her out. She stood before the judge, wearing a conservative suit, and gave an absolute Oscar-worthy performance. She cried, claimed we had a verbal contract, and lied under oath saying she paid me cash for rent. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who clearly didn't tolerate nonsense, looked over the case file and asked for my response. I calmly explained that I had provided the lease showing I was the sole tenant, bank statement showing I paid all deposits and rent, and the text message proving she moved in 29 days prior to her removal. I cited the specific state statute proving she was a transient guest. I also provided the police report from that night confirming her legal address on her ID was elsewhere. The judge turned to fiancé and asked for any proof of this cash rent, a receipt, a bank withdrawal matching the timeline, anything. Fiancé raised her voice and argued that I refused to give her receipts. The judge countered flatly, stating that was because the rent was never paid. She laid out the facts. Fiancé resided in the apartment for 29 days, failing to meet the statutory requirement to establish tenancy, giving me every legal right to revoke my invitation and change the locks. The judge told her she was wasting the court's time. Fiancé lost her composure entirely and blurted out that I ruined her life and got her fired. The judge raised an eyebrow and noted she was looking at a civil suit for an illegal eviction, not a wrongful termination suit. But the judge added that looking at the submitted evidence regarding the corporate expense fraud, fiancé got herself fired. The case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never file it again. Fiancé stormed out of the courtroom, completely pale and furious. She had nothing left. No job, no luxury apartment, and no rich boss to fund her lifestyle. Last I heard from mutual acquaintances, she had to move back into her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, completely broke and blacklisted in her industry. I went home to my quiet, clean apartment, walked out onto my private rooftop terrace, looked out over the downtown skyline, and finally relaxed in absolute peace.